Mary,
Good morning.
glad to have you there on the phone.
Yes, thank you.
I think what we're going to do, so we can make sure we know who's here, because we got some folks that are joining us today officially in the capacity at the meeting, and that way we can make sure Connie and everybody knows who's here, right? So just make sure that you press the button on your microphone when it's time to talk, and then when you're not talking, probably turn it off or we'll hear you breathe, or say things maybe you don't want anybody to hear, right? But if everybody can we'll start with you, Harold. Just announce who you are and where you're from, and then we'll go around the room. And again, anytime you want to speak, for those of you out in the audience, if you can come up to one of the microphones, that'd be really great whenever it's your, if you have a question or if you're on the agenda, that would be really great, okay? All right, Harold.
Okay, I'm Harold Whitus. I'm the District Director of Financial Aid at Alamo Colleges in San Antonio.
I'm Anna Drake. I'm the student representative on the committee, and I'm a PhD student.
And I'm Zelma De Leon, Executive Director of University of North Texas.
Lisa Fox, Executive Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid, Texas A&M.
Marcus Wilson, Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center.
Lisa Blazer, UT San Antonio.
Lisa Mahler, Coordinating Board.
Pilar Janis, Lead High School Counselor and Higher Ed Counselor for BISD, Brownsville Independent School District.
George Torres, Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation.
Carolyn Jones, Collin College.
Ann Walker, Director of Financial Aid, Rice University in Houston, Texas.
Audrey Hernandez, College Advising Corps.
Carolyn Mallory, Financial Aid Director at University of Houston, Victoria.
And Carl Gordon, Director of Financial Aid at College of the Mainland.
For everybody in the audience, yeah. Chris in the committee. Can everybody come up? Well, some folks are on the agenda. Do we have a microphone?
Good morning. My name is John Wyatt. I'm Director of External Relations here at the Coordinating Board.
Good morning, Christopher Murr, Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at Texas State University.
Good morning. Ken Martin, Assistant Commissioner of Financial Services and Chief Financial Officer.
I'm Carla Fletcher. I'm a research analyst at TG.
Linda Battles, I'm Deputy Commissioner for Agency Operations and Communications here at the Coordinating Board.
Good morning, Catherine Carson with the Coordinating Board.
Yes.
Don't be shy.
Oh, you have to, yes.
Elizabeth Putoff with ICUT.
All right. Everybody's here and accounted for, right?
Lisa, and I'm on the line.
Okay, and Mary is here too, so that's awesome. All right, well, let's get started, and we'll try to take a break at some point, and then we'll see where we're at with the agenda today, and whether we want to power through lunch or if we'll need to take a break. We'll play that out as it happens. Okay, everybody, all right? Awesome. Okay, well, we are going to start talking about HB1, so I'm going to call John Wyatt up to a microphone, please.
Good morning. Again, my name is John Wyatt. I'm Director of External Relations here at the Coordinating Board. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the introduced appropriations bills, and particularly how they impact the Coordinating Board's financial aid programs. And then, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So the bills have been introduced in both the House and the Senate, appropriations bills. In the Senate, the appropriations bill this session is SB 2. It includes a reduction in funding for the Coordinating Board of about $97 million, about a 6.4% reduction. That's associated with several things. There was, in the previous session, we were appropriated $30 million to reimburse institutions for their foregone tuition and fees under the Hazelwood program. That funding has been moved over to the TVC, which now has administrative responsibility for that program. So that's the largest single source of the reduction in our budget. However, there were some other reductions in SB2 that are particularly applicable to this group. In terms of financial aid, the Texas Grant Program was level funded in SB2, so we received our base funding from 14-15. I will note, though, that base is reduced from what was appropriated in 14-15 because we had to remove the transfer from Texas Grant to TEOG that occurred in FY15, as well as a gift that we received from TG in 14-15 was not included in our base. So while that adjustment was made, we did receive the amount of funding that we had as our base and our LAR for Texas Grant. In terms of the Texas Beyond Time program, the Senate bill maintains this program for public institutions at level funding with the previous biennium. However, private institutions are only funded at the amount sufficient to cover renewal students in the Beyond Time program. So our understanding is that the idea is that for private institutions, this program is being phased out. The Tuition Equalization Grant Program was level funded. The Texas Educational Opportunity Grant Program was level funded. The Texas College Work Study Program was also level funded. The one major reduction that you should be aware of is in the Top 10% program. That program was funded only at the level sufficient to cover renewal students in the program. So that amounts to about a $21 million reduction over the 14-15 level. And there is rider language restricting that program to renewal students only in the introduced SB2. I'll also note that the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program was reduced by about 25%, about a $1.78 million reduction in SB2. The House version of the appropriations bill is HB1 this session. That actually includes an increase of about 5.3% or $80 million in all funds to the coordinating board. That's largely a reflection of several research programs that benefit emerging research institutions being consolidated into the TRIP program at the coordinating board. So we saw over $100 million increase to that program, largely, again, through the consolidation of funds that were going through other programs. In terms of financial aid, House Bill 1 does provide for an increase in Texas Grant. It's about a $41.3 million increase over the 14-15 base. TEOG is level funded in the bill, as well as Texas College Work Study and the Texas Equalization Grant are both level funded in the introduced bill. Like SB2, HB1 does limit top 10% scholarships to renewal students. So both those bills are at renewal levels only for top 10% students. There is a difference in how the bills treat Beyond Time. The House bill restricts Beyond Time to renewal students only for both public and private institutions. So whereas the Senate bill would maintain this program for public institutions, the House bill would wind it down for all institutions. There's also a provision in the House bill that would appropriate to the institutions about $99 million in the GRD account for Beyond Time, but that is contingent upon the passage of legislation eliminating the tuition set-asides for Beyond Time. That's kind of a quick overview of the appropriations status. In terms of legislation that's been introduced, there have been several bills that have been introduced regarding tuition set-asides. HB 117 has been introduced that would make tuition set-asides optional for institutions and would require that set-asides proceeds be directed first toward covering tuition and fee exemptions for veterans and their dependents. Somewhat similar legislation, HB 1325, has also been introduced. That would actually permit institutions to retain any set-asides in excess of Beyond Time loans that they make. but that excess would have to be dedicated toward exemptions for veterans and their dependents. There's been legislation introduced, HB 375, that would simply eliminate tuition set-asides in their entirety.
Can I just ask a clarification question
Sure.
on the eliminating set-asides? We're eliminating the requirement for set-asides, correct?
That is correct. So
Not
it would be
eliminating an institution's ability to set aside tuition and to set aside tuition for financial aid, correct?
That is correct. At least in terms of HB 375, which is the bill that would eliminate set-asides,
right.
It simply eliminates them from statute.
Okay.
The institutions then can use their tuition as they see fit. There's also been a bill introduced recently by Representative Giddings, HB 952, which would again make it optional for whether public institutions continue to contribute their set-asides to the coordinating board. It would give them the option to retain those set-asides at the institution and potentially make beyond-time awards at the institution. So it would give institutions the option to either do that or to use those set-asides for other eligible financial aid purposes. There have been several bills introduced regarding residency, and obviously that could have an impact. HB 209 and 360 in the House would eliminate the current pathway that allows some undocumented students to be considered residents for both tuition purposes and financial aid purposes in Texas. There's also been a bill introduced in the Senate, SB 117, that would require all Texas grant recipients to also be eligible for federal financial aid. The impact of this would be that because only citizens and legal residents are eligible for federal aid, they would not be eligible for Texas grants, undocumented students. And then I'll just note also, several bills have been introduced that would limit or remove the ability of institutions to increase their tuition and fee rates. HB 89 by Mary Gonzalez would limit institutions' future tuition rates to no more than what they charged in the 14-15 academic year. Similar bill by Senator Ellis, SB 255, would limit institutions' tuition rates to no more than what they charged in the 15-16 academic year. And then SB 233 has been introduced, which would limit growth in an institution's tuition to no more than the rate of inflation. And that's a quick overview of some of the highlights of the session so far, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'm curious. I know that coordinating board was there at the House. They testified on Monday, right?
That's correct.
Did we testify at the Senate as well?
Last week we testified before the Senate Finance on Wednesday.
Can you give us an update of what the coordinating board maybe presented or with regards to the financial aid programs and what was in the appropriations, just so we have an idea of where the coordinating board's coming from?
Sure. Okay. And in terms of the presentation, largely the commissioner and our vice chairman presented. Our commissioner presented to Senate Finance. Our vice chairman and the commissioner presented to House Appropriations. We went over not only the status of the financial aid programs, but also our exceptional item requests for financial aid programs. So as you may know, for Texas grant, we had a $137.9 million exceptional item request. And the goal behind that request was to be able to serve 100% of eligible students at a $5,300 grant award amount. So we communicated that to both committees. For TEOG, we had a $37.3 million exceptional item request. The idea behind that was to ensure that we had level funding with the FY15 funding amount. As you know, due to the transfer of funds from Texas Grant to TEOG and FY15, the program received a pretty substantial increase in that year. In order to maintain level funding going forward, we needed an additional $37.3 million. And so we submitted that as an exceptional item request. It was not funded in the introduced bill. For Texas College Work Study, we had a $5.3 million exceptional item request. We estimated that would provide awards to 1,577 additional students each year. That was not included in either introduced bill. And for TEG, we had an exceptional item request of $18 million to restore the program to FY09 funding levels and serve approximately 30,000 students each year. That was not included in either introduced bill. So we communicated these needs to both of the committees, and going forward, we will work with the members of those committees to see if there are opportunities to introduce, as the bills are considered in committee, to increase these, to have these exceptional item requests funded in the bills.
Do we say anything about be on time or top 10%?
Yes, actually, the commissioner brought this up in the House Appropriations Committee, and his point was that Be on Time is one of the programs that it's one of the few state programs that is aimed toward more middle class students, students who don't necessarily have the largest amount of need, which Texas Grant is more geared toward. So the commissioner made the point that this is a program that really helps families that have need, but they aren't the neediest students out there. There was some discussion of Be on Time at the House hearing. And, Representative Giddings expressed a concern that institutions were not receiving what they were contributing in set-asides, which is correct. And there was some discussion over how that had been treated in the last session. As you may remember, SB 215 included a provision which said that institutions would receive Be on Time allocations in proportion to their share of set-asides. And that has been done. I think the concern that was expressed by Representative Giddings was that if an institution does not use its entire allocation to make Be on Time awards, that funding is then reallocated to other institutions. She expressed a concern about that because I think her goal was to make sure that the institutions receive that funding, whether it's for Be on Time or for other purposes. And it seems like her legislation that she introduced is geared toward accomplishing that. On top 10%, there was some discussion during the Senate Finance hearing on top 10%. Senator West, in particular, expressed his concern about the recommendation to reduce it to renewal-only levels. The commissioner did explain that as part of our requirement to LBB, that we submit a schedule of if we had to take a 10% cut, how would we take that cut? We had submitted a scenario where top 10% was reduced to renewal-only students. It was not our preference, but if we had to take a cut, our feeling was that this was a program where, due to the fact that it was only making $600 awards in the current biennium, was not as effective as other financial aid avenues. So again, put in that position where we have no choice, but you're going to take a cut to your budget. We did say this was one way you could do that. But it is not a preference of the coordinating board. So we will continue to work with Senator West and others to see if there are ways to increase the financial aid funding.
Anybody have any other questions or?
Well, just going to ask if we could get a copy of your synopsis there.
Sure. Actually, I can send you what I have is materials that we presented to House Appropriations and Senate Finance, and I'd be happy to share those.
I just have one. John, could you go back to the House bill has a provision that for Be on Time it would only be for renewals, and also that, was it 99 million? Would be
approximately 99 million of the accumulated set-asides in the GRD account.
That would the excess or unused, compiled over the years.
Yes,
would be returned to the schools. But then the appropriation for Be on Time would only be for renewals.
That is correct. Our understanding of that provision is that it would be appropriated to the schools in proportion to their contribution to the account. And at least the way that it's specified right now, it does not really say or limit the purposes to which they can use those funds.
Okay.
I think the thinking is that whatever legislation that the legislature adopts would specify how those funds can be used, because right now they're dedicated. They have to be used for Be on Time.
Okay. So is the 99 million contingent upon passage of
contingent upon passage of legislation?
Okay. So if whatever that is doesn't pass, then the 99 million stays where it is.
That is correct.
But on the requirement that Be on Time only be used for renewals, is that?
It's specified. It's specified in our riders.
Is it a move to phase it out?
That's our understanding.
Okay.
Is that the impetus behind this was particularly a desire to eliminate tuition set-asides.
Right.
And so that part of that was to, since there'll be no source of funding for Beyond Time, to wind it down. So they wanted to make sure that renewal students continued to be funded, and the rider in our budget pattern does specify that funding can only be used for renewal students.
Okay. Is there a specific bill that's been filed yet to do that?
There've been I mentioned a couple of bills, Representative Giddings' bill. I don't know.
But I mean, to phase out the program. Has there been legislation?
I don't think there's one that says to phase out the program. I think
No.
it's kind of going around that, like 952, Giddings' bill.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been anything that said. I think it's all contingent upon what's happening with tuition set aside and
appropriations
things like
bill
that.
issue right now.
And I do think there's still some thinking going on as to how exactly, if they want to wind down Beyond Time, how it would be accomplished.
Pilar?
It would be remiss if I just didn't speak up on behalf of the students, having spent probably this whole month, a lot of evenings opening up schools, doing FAFSAs with students, and I'm the filter, so I don't want a parent to wait 2 hours if they're not prepared. As I see the income and as I hear the stories, it would be remiss of me not to speak up, at least from the student part, and I know that right now we here don't determine what will happen. Nonetheless, a lot of the students that I serve, because we're 95% economically disadvantaged, and I believe that BISD reflects many districts in the state, especially the border ones. And I see families of 4 and 5 living on $5,500, $8,000. Hearing a student tell me that every month, now he has to go sell his plasma to complete the rent. And so a lot of our students live like this. They live on housing, they live on food stamps, and so hearing these possible cuts is just, because I see the faces, and I know that you do, but I see them. I've been seeing them this month and hearing a lot of stories. So I just wanted to say that I hope things don't turn out bleak for our students, because especially for the HB 1403 and Senate Bill 1528, because that would be completely closing the doors to those students. And cutting other funds in any form or fashion that would affect our students from realizing the collegiate dreams. Because just because you're poor doesn't mean that you don't have high expectations or wanting to come to the flagship institutions or any school, whether it's locally or not. So I did want to speak up, and I hope things turn out well for our students.
And I will say one point that the commissioner made in his testimony was that when you look at the pipeline and the students that are coming up through the public schools, roughly 60% of them are poor, and they will need assistance if they're going to attend higher education. He also made the point that, there are studies that show that in Texas we're going to need 60% of our population will need to have some sort of post-secondary credential in order to meet our workforce needs by 2020. And if we're going to achieve that, particularly given the rising student population that we have, we're going to have to assist those students in being able to access higher education.
And it is a drive in our district. For example, right now we have 4 schools already at 100% of our students have applied. The other schools are at 92%, 95%. Our lowest one is at 85%, and we're trying to get them up. So that means our students have applied to at least one college, one post-secondary institution, whether it's a technical college or a 4-year institution. And so they've done the first part, so we're hoping to see if maybe the second phase, and we're getting them all TSI tested. Whatever they need to do, we offer that service for free in our district, so we're taking them through the process. It's just that in the end, without the money, it doesn't come to pass.
I would really hate to see the Beyond Time program just when we're starting to get some momentum on the program. So I think if we have an opportunity, all of us, as part of being on this committee, I think we have a responsibility to pay attention to the bills that are out there, and if we can get in front of some folks as a unit to testify and to make sure they understand the student stories and how this could impact our students. I mean, it's great that the commissioner and the coordinating board is out there speaking for us, and I think, all the presidents were just there at those hearings as well the last 2 weeks. But we're the boots on the ground that, really gets to see the students, and folks like Pilar and Audrey, you get to see all these students and what's going on with them. So we need to make sure that our voices are heard. So that's the charge, for this committee. You represent financial aid across the state. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to those bills. So if there's anything that, as we go through this legislative session, if you see a bill out there, some of you are probably responding like I am to all the bills that are being posted. So just if there's something that you want us to, really put our voice out there, let me know, and then we'll figure out a mechanism to do that, either through our legislative folks on campus or through our systems or through the coordinating board, because those bills, hearings will start soon, I would imagine, on most of these bills. So we need to make sure that we're out there testifying on behalf of our students. So that's the charge for this year, right? So
I have a question just in response to the comment about Be On Time benefiting middle class students. I'm curious, I do think that's the case, and I am curious whether that's a function of the program or the program requirements, which I don't think it is, or whether it's about the fact that those middle class students are just the ones who know about the program, and that perhaps a case could be made that were there legislation or other activity around trying to make it more promotable, that it really could benefit the students who are needier.
I think there's a number of factors that play into this. One is the requirements. Texas grant is 4,800 EFC, I believe, whereas the need requirement for Be On Time, I believe, is much looser. So, there's the ability to extend that program to students higher up the income chain. The preferred lender issue, I know, is a difficult one for many institutions. I know there's the commissioners and I have been to Washington several times to try to find some relief. There have been a couple of bills that have been introduced in the House, but they haven't really gone anywhere yet. So I do know that that's an impediment. I don't know specifically whether, middle-class students may be better informed and better able to get to that information, but that certainly would make sense.
I do think the nature, when it was originally created, it was designed for the student that's not getting other aid. Now, we did have a few years where we had to give priority to people that weren't getting Texas grant because we didn't have enough Texas grant. But from the initial onset, it was really designed for that middle income kid that, is just beyond the cusp of being eligible. And I got phone calls from Pilar for students that all the time that were interested in getting the Be On Time. So even, as what Pilar just talked about, her district and what she encounters, those students are asking as well. And if we don't have enough funding for other things, then the Be On Time is a good filler, because even if you can't meet the forgiveness component, it's still a zero interest loan. So it's still a great resource, and because it's considered an alternative loan from the federal perspective, that makes it difficult because we don't auto package the Be On Time because we're technically not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to advertise. We can, talk about it and we can say it's there, but we can't push students towards that. They have to actually request it. And we even require renewal students to request it every year so that we don't run into any issues. And so that's what caused some of the participation issues. And I think that's what folks are seeing. Well, you don't have the participation, but that shifted because the coordinating board's been out there advertising it. Folks like Pilar and out in the high schools are out there telling students to request it. We're telling students to request it during some of our outreach presentations, and then wham, we're going to get hit with it getting cut, because of previous history. So
yeah, it seems counterproductive to me, considering all the conversation around debt burden and four-year graduation rates, to look at discontinuing or even phasing out a program that incentivizes timely completion, and even if you can't pay it back, has no interest rate. So I just hope that there's a case that can be made for, rather than discontinuing, maybe adapting or looking at some other ways to
Well,
use the program.
With the new strategic plan that the coordinating board is working on, student debt is the fourth part of that. And I think it's really inherent upon all of us to understand that exactly what you say is that it helps students to understand to graduate on time. It helps them to cut their debt burden. And all of that feeds into the other three parts of the strategic plan that they're working on. And if we want our students to be successful in Texas, we need to make sure that we're lowering their student debt. And this is an excellent way to do that. Our students at Rice, we have a 92% graduation rate. So it's a great tool for them to help ease their borrowing burden. And I would have to think at other schools that that would be the case as well. It also helps, I think, some schools to get those kids through the door in 4 years instead of 6, and would help with those graduation rates if you had students receiving these funds knowing that they would be forgiven once they graduated. That is a huge incentive. So I would hate to see funding cut. We've already seen funding cut from the private side, but I think across the state it's really important to keep that program well funded and not phase it out.
I was going to say that what happens a lot is that the students are not really aware of the process. I know that when I did College Financial Aid 9, I had about 1,000 students and parents. Of course, they're going to hear, you have to request it. It's not going to be part of the award. But at each institution, it's different. For example, even a little over a month ago, a student at UT Brownsville with a 3.9 in the CAP program, didn't know about the Be On Time, didn't get anything else. And so I asked Cammie Penrod, the assistant director. He sent an email, got the Be On Time. But at each institution, it's different. If you want it, at UT Austin, it's ask.fin.edu. And so, and they don't know, like, you're right, you can't advertise it, but somehow the students don't know it's an academic challenge. That's what I tell them. If you want the academic challenge, because you will have to finish in the 4 years with a 3.0. But I think it's that the students do not understand. They'll ask me, do I have to do an application for that one, ma'am? And so that probably is why a lot of the students don't ask for it, because I know at UT Brownsville, they were going to be returning money. But again, and there were students there that could have taken advantage of it.
And on our end, we had so many students asking for it, we had to reduce the award. So that was the only way, because our actual allocation is almost $1 million less than what we contributed. So it's, we're going to ask for more money next month, just FYI. So that's because that's where we're at. It's shifted, completely shifted. So any other, Selma?
Yes, our undocumented student population continues to grow. Was there any discussion on what options will be available for them if Texas grant goes away for them?
There really hasn't been that much discussion yet about how the legislature intends to treat undocumented students. As I mentioned, there have been some bills filed that would eliminate the residency pathway, the 3 years of high school, graduate from a Texas high school. But in terms of how those students would be treated if the residency were changed, there hasn't been much discussion. We do produce here at the coordinating board an overview of that provides the number of undocumented students currently in higher education, how much financial aid they're receiving, how much formula funding goes toward their support. So we have that data here, but I do think the conversation hasn't really gotten underway yet in the legislature.
I know that I had a request as I was driving up yesterday from a counselor at our largest high school. There are several students. They are juniors. They're hearing the news, and they've lived there since they were little, since kinder. They have been in our institution, but they're afraid. They want me to go talk to. There's about 3 students that they want me to, to explain to them to wait and see. But it's actually creating fear in students, thinking that that's it. They'll have to wash dishes or whatever it is, because they won't be able to access a collegiate experience. These are top students. These are students in the top quarter of the class or top 15% of the class. And so even the kids are hearing the buzz. They know. So.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Lisa, this is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
We have concerns as well regarding the veterans population and the proposals to make reductions to Hazelwood. So when we reviewed this last week here in Harlingen, the reduction of Hazelwood tuition exemption would affect 39% of our current students who are receiving Hazelwood if the income changes were in place or the income limits were added into it. We've also had an increase of 425% increase of students using Hazelwood, but now we're talking about reducing it. We're getting more veterans, and I think we need to continue supporting our veterans.
Has your institution, because I think that you're talking about the LBB and what their proposal, right, for all that, potentially reducing the legacy portion?
Right.
Yeah. But I think that's coming because institutions are seeing the burden, and how much is being expended for Hazelwood. So there's a lot of discussion, and I will tell you, having sat through some of the hearings, especially at the Senate hearings, every single president had Hazelwood in their remarks. So I think the message is there that we've got to figure out a game plan, whether that includes a reduction in funding or a reduction in of who's eligible, especially from a legacy perspective, because the legacy program is what kind of spun it so high, or potential funding. So I know that there was some funding proposed. I can't remember if it was in which bill, but it's not enough to cover the whole program. And so we need to keep getting that message out there. It's a great benefit, but there's limits to what the state can take with regards to the cost. So that every single president had something to say about that in their testimonies.
And there was it was $30 million that was included in both bills. There was $30 million last session. They continued that this session.
That's right.
But they transferred it over to the TVC, whereas previously that had been housed here at the coordinating board. I will tell you that this is an issue that has a lot of attention from legislators, particularly in light of the court case in Houston that potentially is going to remove the residency, the point of entry residency requirement. So this is something where I know legislators are really trying to grapple with how do we either reshape the benefit or find the funds to pay for it.
Mary, did you have anything else you needed to?
No, I guess it will just force colleges to review their packaging policies, especially as it involves veterans.
Right.
Thank you.
You bet. Tom, did you want to say something?
By the way, the $30 million, is that $30 million for the biennium?
It is a biennial number, yes.
Okay.
Anybody else have any?
If the bill for the elimination of tuition set-asides goes into effect, when would that be? Would that be for the upcoming year, or because we're going to start awarding soon for the 15-16 award year, and we have our tuition offset?
I'd have to go and check the specifics of the legislation.
And it's not necessarily for the elimination. Giddings' bill is talking about the set-asides. Where does it say it's effective?
1209 is...
Which bill are we talking about?
Well, and there have been several bills that would impact.
There's a bill that repeals all set-asides.
All set-asides. But I don't remember if it's for the...
I believe it's effective September 1.
It might be.
For the 52, I think it is.
Yeah,
it is.
Mm-hmm.
So then we need to notify our chief fiscal officers and presidents that we may have to...
Well, the concept, though, is that the school can still determine to set aside. So it's not like you have to, stop setting aside funds. It would be up to the institution based on...
Representative Giddings' bill, I understand, gives them an option.
We can still award it.
The mandatory requirement goes away, right.
Yeah.
And then I think the Beyond Time legislation, it's all going to be contingent on if the set-asides go away, then there's no money to put into the Beyond Time program. Yeah. And so thereby we would have no money. And then that $99 million that's been sitting there in the coffers, I mean, that is the one plus, and I'm speaking for public institutions, that is a big plus for us because that's our money. so at least we can get that money back to use it. And use it how we need to for some of our students. So as long as all that legislation goes through. But yeah, I'm pretty sure everything. I think some of the tuition, as far as the limits on tuition, those are different bills are at different award years. But for these programs, I think it would be effective this next year. That's why we always want to use caution before packaging. I do feel pretty good about the fact that Texas grant, I haven't gotten the idea that it's going to be cut in any way. So, at least we can go forth and award.
And it's certainly not uncommon for the introduced bills to kind of start at a lower number. And then as the session goes on, they'll hopefully be able to invest more resources in select programs.
Right. Yes, sir.
I've got a question emailed in asking, will it, by it I'm assuming the proposed bills, will it take away statutory and designated tuition set-asides?
The bills that I've seen so far are just designated tuition set-asides. I'm not aware of any bills that would eliminate the statutory tuition set-aside.
I haven't seen any on statutory either. This is just for designated. And it just takes away the mandatory requirement. I just want to keep reiterating that because that's important. It just means the institution then has the flexibility. So, there could be some pluses to that. We have to kind of look at all of that. There could, then you're not bound by the mandatory requirements of the designated set aside. So as long as your institution supports financial aid to students, you might have a little bit of flexibility there as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask about the top 10%. You talked about funded only for renewals. Was that in both bills, SB2 and HB1? Did they talk about that?
Yes, both bills have the same funding level and the same restriction that only renewal students can be funded.
So it's very likely that we would only be picking up renewals and no initials?
Certainly, if the bills as introduced go forward, then that would be the case.
And that's another program I think we need to, and I understand why the coordinating board, if there was going to be a cut, that's a program to cut. But that's another program. As I told my president, in looking at the Be On Time and the top 10% in Texas grant, they're wanting to fund the Texas grant, but take funding from these other sources to help fund that. Those are two different populations that you're serving there. And so we have to be careful that we're not putting all of our money into the Texas grant at the expense of these other programs. So, that's something that that's another program I think we need to make sure that our voices are heard.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, the top 10%, it's actually turned out, it's taken a while it's another one of those, it kind of took a while to get that momentum going. But, we had the same thing with Texas Grant. That's what's so interesting. If you remember back in the heyday with the Texas Grant, we were giving money back because and then as the program evolved, now we don't have enough money. And so we've kind of been in that same boat with Be On Time and top 10%, and they serve another population of students that still need assistance. So, and we're rewarding the top 10%, which is really great. So those are things that we need to make sure our voices are heard so that we don't necessarily lose those programs for those students.
If we lose the top 10%, will someone send out some kind of notification? Because I wouldn't want counselors in the state to be telling students that they possibly might get one, and the information doesn't get out so that it funnels down to the students and the parents, so that there isn't an expectation.
Well, I think one of the things that we will need your all's help on is making sure that the high school counselors know right now that in legislation there's a possibility. So if we can figure out a way, that's the thing about the legislative session. We're all used to it. And so we know that things are kind of up in the air, but the high school counselors may not. So instead of waiting until it's gone or it's here, we certainly don't want to be telling students, and a lot of us are putting things on our website saying, okay, there's no guarantee, we just don't know. And we can say that a lot. But it's a possibility that top 10 could go away, Be On Time could. Yeah. So we need to make sure that we're all kind of getting that word out there.
And it is still hard for parents and students to explain, if you have a caveat that's subject to funding, when the funding doesn't come and they say, but it's a state program. So it's hard to communicate that still.
Yeah. And that is the challenge of a legislative session that, we won't know until May what the final numbers are going to be in those appropriations bills.
The region centers, I know that they're constantly sending out information on different kinds of workshops. Like for us, it's Region 1. And perhaps that might also be a venue besides the coordinating board and the universities in different venues to get the word out to counselors.
And is TASFA doing any high school workshops or anything like that?
I'm sorry. This past, starting in, I want to say November.
Okay.
And those have wrapped up.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Maybe we can come up with some language and figure out a way to get that distributed. Some of us could just kind of pitch in and come up with a one-pager that, and then if you guys, maybe I can call upon the two of you to help get that distributed, or we could get it to the regions and maybe utilize TASFA and help, since we've got the connections with the high school counselors that maybe attended or something. I don't know. I know they're already wrapped up, but and let them know that things are kind of in limbo right now, so use caution when telling students what's available.
You also have a lot of Advise Texas Core throughout the state. So also, and I know that we're lucky enough to have 5 in our district, and they know those students sometimes better than our senior counselors. They work so closely with them, so that might also be another avenue.
And I'll actually just mention also, you may be aware that the coordinating board has an exceptional item request for Advise Texas in our budget. We've requested $8 million to replace the CACG funding that's no longer available. That was not in the introduced bill. However, we have been briefing members and asking for their support on adding that funding. So that is something we will pursue through the process going forward.
Just a thought. Has going back to the Hazelwood program, has any thought been given or suggestion been made about just simply, or not simply, but another way of funding the program is to increase the permanent fund, the endowment that was created to generate the appropriation? Because the appropriations are coming, or restricted funding, they're coming from an endowment that was created a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So it's really not a draw on the general fund. It's really the interest earned off of that endowment. And it hasn't, I think the original concept presented by the governor's office was that this endowment we created and then additional contributions would be solicited to go into the endowment, which would then generate more money. Not nearly what the governor is requesting, which I think is over $530 million for the biennium. But if this is a worthwhile program, which it is, an endowment's been created, then another way, a second way, in addition to straight appropriations to increase the annual appropriation, another way of going about it would be to increase the endowment. And I'm just wondering if anyone has discussed doing a campaign of sorts to get more than one contribution to the endowment. If that's a suggestion I'm throwing on the table, but I'm curious as to whether there's been any discussion about increasing the endowment.
I have not heard any discussions about some sort of campaign in terms of trying to increase contributions to that endowment. As you know, the challenge with the endowment is the amount of money that you're getting out of it is just nowhere comparable to the cost. But yes, obviously if you grow that corpus, you grow the ability to draw off on the interest. In our conversations with legislative staff, most of the focus has been, are there ways you can tweak the eligibility? And is there a combination, perhaps, of changes to eligibility and additional sources of funding that might strike some kind of balance?
And I was just asking, as a part of that combination, there's another part. You can tweak it. You can lower the pool of eligible applicants. You can increase annual appropriations. But for this one, you also have this endowment sitting there, too, which can be increased, and you go about it 3 different ways rather than just the 2 different ways of tweaking and putting more money into it. Since the endowment is there and it was created for this specific purpose, and nothing's been contributed to it, I don't think, since it was created a couple of years ago.
I'm aware of.
It would be interesting if members of the legislature the executive branch would say, well, let's put a team together and go out and raise some money to put into the endowment, in addition to doing these other things. That's all. I wasn't saying instead of. It's in addition to. And so there hadn't been any discussion that you know of.
Not that I'm aware of.
To attack it from that end. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts or comments or questions on this topic? Good discussion.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, but possible end of modification of tuition deregulation, was that kind of included? That was the next topic on the agenda.
Yeah,
You feel like you covered that?
Unless you feel like I didn't, I'd be happy to answer any questions. As I mentioned, there are several bills out there. But in terms of a consensus, I don't really feel like there's been a consensus as to how that you would move forward in terms of this idea. I know that one other thing I'll mention, Senator Seliger has mentioned his proposal for performance-based tuition at institutions, whereby the 9 performance metrics that are common to all institutions currently. His legislation would say that if you meet your goals on 5 of 9, you have the ability to raise your tuition as you do currently. If you do not, you would be limited to the rate of inflation. So obviously giving Senator Seliger's chairmanship, I think that's an option that will be discussed very seriously.
Is that already proposed? Is there a bill number?
I'll have to check. I don't believe that a bill has been introduced yet, but he has discussed that publicly.
Question: are those performance-based points based on enrollment stat or levels for the students? I know if we're talking about like for the funding, so I know most of our students at my institution are less than full-time, so that a lot of times they don't get counted in categories.
Yeah, I don't have the precise metrics with me, but they're in the each institution's appropriations bill pattern. They're the performance measures that are included by the LPP.
And I believe that institutions were able to choose the metrics. I don't remember the exact specifics, but I've seen there were multiple metrics to choose from on based on your institution. Then you could determine what metrics you felt like you needed to meet in order to receive, because this performance-based funding would be over and above the regular formula funding. So that's the way I understand it. But we were, I believe, if memory serves, we went out and looked at the metrics and were able to determine which metrics work best for UTSA. So I think that's how it's working, but I don't know all the specifics on that. I've just been in some of those meetings. Okay. Any other questions or anything? Thank you, John, very much. Appreciate it. Okay, Lisa, you are up.
I'm just going to be very brief in my comments about the rules that our board adopted on at the meeting of January 22nd. They do become effective March 4th. We emailed the adopted rules to all the institutions. So in addition to your having them in your packet, I can't remember what date that was, Connie. I don't know if you remember, but it was fairly in the last couple of weeks, I believe. So at any rate, the TEG rules were on the consent calendar because there really was there were no significant changes. It was just mostly language recommended, clarifying language recommended by ICUT. The main change to the Texas grant rules was one that this group recommended, and that is to change the definition of attempted hours for eligibility period limits. Attempted hours, the current rule, the rule that existed, of course, allowed a student to qualify for a grant for 150 semester credit hours attempted while receiving the grant, whereas the adopted rule would limit the eligibility for a grant for 150 semester credit hours attempted, period, regardless of whether or not the student received a Texas grant with those hours, for those hours. It also includes a professional judgment option to allow eligibility beyond 150 attempted semester credit hours based on a student's hardship circumstances, as long as the student does not attempt more than 150 hours while receiving the grant. Additionally, the new rule includes clarifying language concerning eligibility for renewal awards, periods of grant eligibility for students and the required adjustments to awards if additional resources are identified after the disbursement. And as far as the TEOG rule is concerned, this was the rule regarding allocation methodology. The rule for allocation and reallocation applies only to allocations for FY16 and 17. That was intended, it was intentional because you all know from previous discussions that there were some institutions that were not happy with the methodology, the TSTIs and Lamar's, and by limiting the rule to apply to 16 and 17, that will allow for a possible legislative resolution and another negotiated rulemaking committee to determine allocation methodologies for periods after FY17. There were also some language clarifying requirements, nothing significant, just clarifying language. So that's really all I have on the rule changes.
Anybody have any questions or concerns regarding the rules? We've been talking about them for quite some time, so. But if there's any questions, we definitely want to talk about it. Everybody good? Yes, ma'am? Yeah, and actually I just realized that we hadn't done that, and I pulled mine out and realized that we did not go. If it's not on my script, and so if it's not on my script, I'm not going to remember to do it. One thing that we everybody should have received a copy of the minutes from our last meeting. Have you reviewed it, hopefully? Do you have any questions or any errors or anything that you feel needs to be adjusted in the minutes from the last meeting? I didn't see anything. I reviewed them yesterday, but.
No.
Mary, you okay?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any? So can I get a motion to accept the minutes?
Motion
Marcus, second. Carolyn? All approved, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are passed. All right, good. Okay, well, moving on. Discussion of the new Be On Time loan counseling module. I believe Janie, Catherine.
I guess that's me.
Okay.
Okay. The loan counseling module has been a real success. We have over 700 students that have completed the module, and at 37 schools. So we're getting people.
We're doing it, right?
Which is really great. That's about it.
That's our update. We didn't. Okay.
I do have one other comment. There was a notice, a reminder sent to all institutions about the reallocation of the BOF funds, and we haven't gotten a whole lot of response. We've got about 10 institutions responding, wanting additional funds. So just putting that out there. So if you are
the cutoff date, though, is what?
We asked for the 20th for both public and private.
Okay.
We can always extend the ones for the public because the date for sweeping or reallocating those funds is not until March. But just kind of wanted a head count on that.
And I should probably also piggyback on that and say I know the staff in grants and special programs have been making phone calls to institutions who haven't requested Texas grant funds because there are some significant amounts that
they haven't gone in and pulled their funds for disbursements?
Correct. Tomorrow
the day.
is the date that the funds will be swept. Tomorrow at 5, I believe.
We don't want the funds to be swept.
And reallocated after that.
We'll take them.
No, we will. Just saying. Texas A&M is always trying to take all the funds, so he's taking all my funds for a while.
Aggies.
If it's not the Aggies, it's Tom. So, all right. All right. Does anybody have any? Have you had any discussion on the Be On Time loan module? Any issues or any concerns that we need to bring forth at this point since it's on the table? We haven't encountered any problems that I know of.
Beautiful.
Oh.
One point I want to make, Ken Martin, regarding the reallocations. We're seeing, my concern is we're seeing rather an anomaly right now. We're seeing institutions, especially Texas grants, who have only spent or allocated half of what they've been provided at this point in time. In prior years, we see a much more stronger utilization through institutions. And I'm not sure if the need is not there or if there's something else. I'm certainly open for feedback. Our team, as Lisa mentioned, has been in contact with certain areas, but I was very surprised. I think what we saw yesterday was a sum of around $70 million at this point from a number of around $330 million originally, so a very high percentage. Usually we end the year at $1 million left remaining. Now, we still have time. Those funds will be reallocated. I'm just concerned if there's something different that any of you know that's occurring that would cause some of these funds, UT being one of them, and several other institutions that just seem to be anomalous this year versus prior years. Okay. Just bringing it up, awareness purposes, and again, we'll be reallocating Beyond Time funding too to try and maximize utilization this year as well as any other financial aid programs.
Is this across the board among all institutions, or is this a handful of institutions that haven't pulled funds?
It is not across the board. We are seeing some institutions, numbers. I'm just talking a couple larger ones that I pulled out when we looked at a list. It's a large list, but Texas State was almost fully utilized at this point in time. But some other larger institutions were half utilized. And I can't remember A&M and some others. It was...
We're getting ready to ask for more money, so...
Right, and we have received requests for more money from other institutions. So it was wide swings. It was not consistent across the board. Thus, my concern is there's something different happening that's different, or maybe there's other areas of opportunity that just have not are being utilized outside of this. It would surprise me, though, especially with Texas Grant. But Beyond Time is similar situation.
Ken, the $70 million, is that in all the programs or just one of them?
Just Texas Grant.
Just Texas Grant.
Texas Grant.
That's huge for Texas Grant.
And I believe UT was around $16 million unutilized out of around $35 million allocated.
I don't do that anymore. Do you have any figures on how much Beyond Time is unutilized?
Do you want total, private and public, or just
It'd be really good to
public?
know.
Just total.
Yeah.
Total? Sorry, I have one. Oop.
Ask for the server and find out.
I think it's about 11, a little bit over 11 million. 11.
11 million?
Do you know how much for private? Because I'll take some.
Might as well get them all out, right?
9 for private. 2 for the public. I think it's vice versa.
I suspect on the private side, many of us have felt like the program is going to be, well, it's really, we don't do set aside, so it really isn't our money, so we've not probably addressed it as aggressively as we could. We have allocated or spent everything that we were given. This year, help me understand again, can we give Beyond Time to new students?
This year, yes.
This year?
This year.
Okay. I'll have one of my folks contact y'all.
Okay. I just want to bring up
Great,
for
thank you.
awareness. Thank you.
How long do we have to request more Beyond Time? Tomorrow? Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I'm emailing Deanna to make sure that. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Spend that money. Okay. All right, next we've got the TG NASFA study.
This is Carla Fletcher, who's with our research department, and this TG's been working with NASFA over the last year or so on a study to create recommendations for improving the content and the design, the administration, the application of student loan counseling. And coincidentally, Jeff Webster's in Washington, D.C. right now giving a similar presentation to a group. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Carla.
Hello. I'm Carla Fletcher. I'm at TG, sitting in for Jeff, and yeah, he's giving. I think he gave this presentation an hour or two ago, probably. So it's officially the launch of our first report of 5 on the effectiveness of student loan counseling, and we're working with NASFA, and so. Loan counseling is very important, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows. It can help students stay out of default if it's done correctly, if they really understand what they're reading, what they're getting from it. It's not just the responsibility of the colleges, though it probably feels that way, but it's really a collaboration of what the higher education institution does for counseling, what policymakers put in place to allow to happen, and what the Department of Education can put together. It's everyone working together to put together something that students can really take away what they need from and get a sense of their rights and responsibilities. So colleges can really help in this process because they're the front line for the loan counseling there for the students. And we wanted to assess the efficacy. Is the current process working? Are students really learning from the experience? Is there something that we can do that's better? So we wanted to answer these questions, and we worked with NASFA on this study. And hopefully we'll get some slides. I know. Thanks. I have a box of our first report right there that I haven't opened yet, but I can get that going right now.
Yeah, that'd be great. Why don't we do that, and that way we have something in front of us.
I'll help.
You know what? Why don't we take a 15-minute break so that way we can get the slides up? And I was going to do a break right after this anyway. We have a few more topics after that to talk about. So let's take a 15-minute break. It is 10:41, so we'll come back together at 10:55-ish. Get your caffeine, get your pastry, breakfast casserole, Halls for me. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move forward. So, Carla, you're on.
All right. Okay, so here's the outline of the presentation today. And I will quickly go through these first 3 and then spend the bulk of the presentation on the borrower observations, which is what the report that got passed out is about. Okay, so student debt has become a huge public policy issue, and affordability has been in the spotlight recently. Students are hit really hard by this issue. TG did a study a few years back that estimated that about 50,000 bachelor's degrees are lost per year due to affordability issues. And the Great Recession has made affordability even harder for current students who are trying to go to school and for former students who borrowed and are trying to make those payments. And there's some harsh consequences for default. There's lots of escape clauses. There's grace periods, deferments, forbearances, income contingent repayment plans, and the fact that it takes nearly a year of completely ignoring your student loan bill to go into default. But once you do default, the consequences are severe and life-altering. President Obama had an executive action in June that expanded pay-as-you-earn, and he also called for better consumer information and called for improving loan counseling tools. So this is really a first. He's calling out loan counseling specifically. So it really is becoming a big issue. And there's been congressional proposals related to loan counseling as well that included covering additional information in counseling, even more than they already cover. And also included some innovations like annual loan counseling or targeting specific at-risk student groups. So it's a hot topic, but how did we even get counseling in the first place? It started in 1986 with the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. We saw the first statutory mandate for exit counseling. And then in 89, the Student Loan Default Reduction Initiative added required counseling and specified some information to share with students. In 98, a Higher Education Act amendment clarified that electronic means were an acceptable medium for exit counseling. So this is reflecting the fact that the internet was everywhere now and people were going to websites all the time. In 2000, the Department of Education regulations required even more topics to be covered. And then in 2008, the Higher Education Opportunity Act mentions interactive programs for counseling and added even more topics. So in the 80s, the focus was on the astronomically high default rates at a lot of schools and trying to do something about that. And then in the 90s, the changes reflected the common use of the internet and just continuing to add topics. And so we're at the point now where there are a lot of topics that are required to be covered. And so we wanted to do a literature review, and I will very briefly cover this. We have an entire paper, a literature review about this that will be coming out soon, probably in the next week or two. So we're wondering, is it possible for students to really even understand that huge list of required topics that's getting thrown at them when they first arrive at college? Studies have identified that there are gaps in knowledge in borrowers concerning qualifying for aid, the risk of private loans, the importance of maximizing grants, and the consequences of borrowing. And other studies have found that some borrowers don't even recall going through exit counseling. So if they don't even remember it, then they probably don't remember any of the information in it either. Borrowers are unable to remember the interest rates in terms of repayments for their own loans, and some of them express shock at the amount owed at the end of their studies. So that's a problem. They don't know what they're borrowing until the end. The method of delivery is important. Studies conducted in the health field have found that face-to-face is more effective than web-based interventions. And I think anecdotally, financial aid directors would say that face-to-face is certainly more effective than the online tool, but it's also much more expensive. Timing is important. Entrance counseling occurs when students first arrive on campus. They're very distracted trying to get settled, and they need their money. So that's a difficult time. And undergraduates report feeling that exit counseling is provided after they can really rectify their situation. So they learn, oh, I've borrowed too much for years, but it's too late. They already owe that. So just-in-time moments can be especially effective. We found in some of the literature. But it's hard to know when exactly students need to know what, and then having the resources available. And really a big issue is that schools only have leverage at the beginning when they can't give the disbursement out until they take the entrance counseling. That is the leverage that schools have. So that's what we have to work with right now. Studies have also found that poor decisions arise from long and complex forms, and it could be argued that the loan counseling is a long and complex form. There's a lot of information required. Students have to weigh current debt levels, types of loans, repayment options, predictions of future income streams, and monthly budgeting, and it's just a lot. It can result in cognitive overload. And in general, it's more difficult to cognitively draw money from future income streams than from current income streams. So asking a fresh in college 18-year-old to figure out how much they should borrow based on what they think they're going to make in a few years in a career that they may not have any idea about, that's a difficult task. So it's a lot of the information just isn't sinking in. So we wanted to observe students going through the actual counseling tool and see what they got out of it. The majority of schools in the country use the Department of Education's online tool. And it makes sense. It's free, it's completely scalable for any number of borrowers without additional resources needed by the school, and it's guaranteed to satisfy Title IV counseling requirements. So the department's tools are legally adequate and undeniably highly efficient, but are they effective? We conducted a series of 80 user experience tests with actual student loan borrowers, primarily using the Department of Education's tool, but we did also do a few with Mapping Your Future. Those 80 tests are about evenly split between entrance and exit counseling and divided among a dozen schools in 4 sectors and several geographic regions across the country. We also constructed the borrower sample to ensure some amount of diversity among students based on the list there: sector, region, gender, age, race, parents' education, level of financial literacy, and financial aid awareness. And we determined that by when the school would send the emails out to their students to ask them if they wanted to participate, it also sent them a link to a survey that they would fill out. So it's just a self-reported, very simple level of financial literacy, things like that. And we did this not to get a representative sample, because it's a very small sample, but just to make sure that we weren't getting, for example, an entire population of students who believe that they know a ton about financial education. We didn't want to skew our sample that way, so we picked these variables because we thought these were things that might impact the way they go through the counseling. So this is about the exit counseling. This is the report that's out right now that you have in your hands. Some of the positive themes that we saw is that students really do take it seriously. They came into it knowing how important it is, knowing that they really cared about their repayment. They wanted to get it right. So they came in with a full tank of gas. They also, at this point, it's exit counseling. They know the basics. They all knew that they had a grace period coming up. They all knew that they needed to repay their loan, which is good. They all knew that they had options for flexibility or postponement of repayments. Even if they didn't know what it was called, they knew that something was there to help them out. They also mostly knew just basics about finances like interest, taxes, credit cards. And they had a desire to learn about action items. How much will my payments be? Who do I pay? When do I need to pay? And students wanted to make larger payments. We frequently heard students say things like, I just want to get this taken care of, put this behind me, get through it quickly. They expressed a strong interest in the counseling segments that have to do with how to save money in the long run, like paying during grace, paying interest during deferments, signing up for the auto withdrawal, because they understood that repaying quickly equals a less expensive loan in the long run. And they were not much interested in topics framed as, this is what you do if you get into trouble, because none of them thought that they were going to get into trouble. They just didn't think that was going to happen to them. The strongest overarching positive theme was the closer the topic or the presentation of the topic was connected to the student's actual money, the more interest and focus they had in it. So if it was a calculator that they could put in their own information and see something that was specific to them, then they had a lot of interest in that. They like the interactive elements. It's a very interactive tool now. They redid it a couple years ago, and it's a lot better than it used to be. They like the parts of the module that let them enter their own personal information and return results specific to them, like I just said. There's also, because they log into NSLDS before getting into the tool, it can pull all of their loan information, and it just auto-populates their loan information at various points throughout the module, so that's helpful as well. And there's a chart at the very end that combines that pre-populated loan information with income information that the student puts in an earlier point in the tool, and it gives them a chart that compares repayment plans based on their own information. And students very much like that chart. They also came away with a strong understanding of the importance of the servicer. They knew that the servicer is the one that would be contacting them and the one that they would be paying, and that's the one that they would go to if they were having problems. So some of the negative themes, though. The first one is pop-up quizzes. So they're not because they're there at all, because pop-up quizzes they're not, pop-up maybe isn't the right word, but they're just questions interspersed throughout the text. They're great, and they need to be in there because students can't just be allowed to click through to the end in 2 seconds and be done with it. So the problem is that the the questions that they're asking are not good. They're not helpful. And if the students don't take it seriously, don't take the questions seriously, then they don't take the whole module seriously. Students perceived the quizzes as trivial, just something to get through. The quizzes were often completely just common sense, or they focused on a really specific, unimportant detail. And then, for the most part, they were way too easy to cut and paste. So the question box would be here, and literally verbatim, in the paragraph above it, would be the question and answer. So that's not retention of knowledge. That's just a straight-up copy and paste, moving your eye 1 inch. So the students thought that was kind of ridiculous, actually. And if you start to think that the questions are silly, and that's supposed to be the takeaway, I mean, that's what you think that the Department of Education wants you to take away from that. That's why they're asking you about it. And if they find that silly, then it kind of devalues the entire module. So one quote from a borrower, "The questions are weird. It's like either something really basic or some crazy detail. They're definitely not teaching me anything important." So this kind of leads to our largest theme with the negative themes, which is the skip dynamic. We observe the skip dynamic in many of the student sessions. Basically, the borrower is confronted with irrelevant information. For example, they talk about the promissory note in exit counseling. So the borrower sees that and they're like, why do I need to know this? I already did that 4 years ago and there's nothing I need to do now. So this leads to devaluing the whole experience, and we call that the skip dynamic, and I'll kind of go through it here. Students begin with a sense that their counseling session will be full of relevant and very important information, and they really do start with that sense of optimism, and they really do start reading like every word when they start out. So the meticulous reading begins. And then they encounter this information that doesn't seem very relevant to them, and they realize, wait a second, there's stuff in this module that I don't need to know, so maybe I don't have to read every word. So they start in with the inattention. They start devaluing some of the information. The shine has worn off of the module, and they begin skimming. And then they start selectively reading. They're looking at headers or maybe keywords or sentences just to say, do I need to read this section or not? And then the problem here is the lack of differentiation. They don't know what's important because everything is presented equally in the module. So everything looks like it should be important, or the opposite of that, everything looks like it's not important because they can't tell if something is important to them or not. Everything is presented equally across the module, and there's a lot of information in there. So that leads to inattention. They just start skipping over the paragraphs, and at this point, a lot of the students are answering the quiz questions incorrectly. So you can tell that they're really not reading as much anymore. And then the incorrect skipping, this is where the student might skip something that they really do need to know, but they're not reading very carefully. So it's not important to them, or they don't think it's important to them. But it is important to keep their attention. When borrowers lose their focus, they make the quick judgments about whether or not to read that section based on just reading a headline or a sentence. And in doing that, they might end up skipping something that's important for them to know. And they know that they're doing this. As they're going through it, they're telling us like, oh, I don't know, this is taking a long time. I don't think I need to know this. And then they'll say things like, if I need to know it later, I'll just Google it. So that doesn't seem very helpful. And then another one that we got a lot was, well, the servicer will just tell me, right? They'll just email me. In fact, here's a quote from a student. The servicer wants my money, right? So they'll just email me. So that's not a student acting as their own advocate. And I don't think they realize that the servicer just wants their money, and they don't necessarily have their best interests at heart. So what we found through all of our borrower observations are there's some basic things that we think would help the borrowers to get through this and to understand it better. The first one is just a basic introduction. We had students where they log into NSLDS, they click on the exit counseling module, and then they turn to us and go, so what do I do now? well, what do you think you do? Because we're neutral. We're not supposed to tell them what to do, but it was kind of awkward. So there needs to be something to describe what this is, why it's important, what the navigation is going to be like, the fact that they have to answer quiz questions to move on, because that's not clear. A lot of students would go through to the bottom of the page, try to continue, and they would get an error. They didn't realize they had to answer the quiz questions. It also should give them a reasonable estimate of the time it takes to get through it. There's actually, in the part between logging into NSLDS and clicking on the exit counseling module, there's a little sentence that says that it will take at least 30 minutes to get through the counseling. No one actually reads that, and it's a little bit misleading because it takes closer to an hour if you're actually reading and being a proactive participant in the interactivity. So it's technically true that it takes at least 30 minutes, but it's a bit misleading. And it really needs to be on the top of the module because no one reads that sort of in-between part. And so in line with that, students kind of want the framework of what am I going to see? What's sort of the outline? And I'll get to that in just a little bit with a suggestion that we have for the department. They also found it very text-heavy and bulky. We think that if there was, even with the same amount of information, if they could just put more white space, it would make it look less intimidating to read through. Also, somehow signaling if the material is applicable to the borrower. So maybe the way the current regulation is, all this stuff has to be in there, but maybe a borrower who doesn't have a FFELP loan doesn't need to see information about FFELP loans. So if there's some way that could be grayed out or put behind an expandable box, or something that would just help the borrower see what they need to see. So here's another quote. They know what loans I had, so it would have been nice if they could have just populated the website with the information that I need. Plus, there was a lot of stuff that was sort of good general advice, but wasn't really about repaying your loans, and it just added to the bulk. So that's kind of getting at, after you get through the first few pages, there's a page of just general good financial information, which is great, and students should know about this. But at this point, they've been going through this really long counseling process, and they get to this, and they're like, this isn't even about student loans anymore. So this is taking forever. So it's just adding to the bulk is the problem. So that was the exit counseling. I'll go through the entrance a little bit. We have completed that and have written the report, and it's going through TG internally, and it should be published probably in about a month or so. There are a lot of similar themes. Students like the practical information as opposed to like the good to know about your financial health kind of information. Again, students found it to be text heavy. It's an exact copy of the exit counseling with minus a couple of the topics. So it's exactly the same text, exactly the same layout. And it's very text heavy. And especially in entrance, the students just seem more lost because they're completely new to all this. And then as in the exit, there's no introduction. So again, students kind of are lost from the beginning. And they skim and skip. We saw the same skip dynamic in entrance as we did in exit. So some of the notes that are new in the entrance counseling, there's, as I said, it's an exact copy. So it's the same level of complexity as exit, even though it's a totally different group of students. So it's kind of a failure to adjust the material to the audience. And not everyone who's taking entrance counseling is 18-year-old right out of high school, of course, but those do exist. So there has to be some way of reaching everybody, because a lot of those students who have never dealt with personal finances are just completely lost when they're getting into this counseling. Timing is a huge issue. So there are, of course, some students who are on top of things and they complete their counseling in the summertime and they come to school with their money and they're ready to go. But there are students who procrastinate. And we were at a couple of campuses where it's like complete chaos at the beginning of that fall semester. And the students come on campus, they didn't even realize that they needed to do this counseling, or they had forgotten, because I'm sure they were informed. And they didn't know that they didn't have their money and they need to get books. And so they're just being funneled, here's the computer lab, and they're just like frantically going through the counseling, trying to get through it. And some of them even have their parents over their shoulders, like, come on, let's go. So, and I mean, frankly, the financial aid office too needs them to get through the counseling so the process can move on. So it really can be the schools that we saw, it was pretty chaotic time, and that's a problem. Preparation is an important aspect. In order to get the full experience intended, students really need to bring information that they may not need to know, such as the amount that they're borrowing. And maybe you wouldn't be surprised. I was kind of surprised to learn that a lot of these students were coming in and saying, well, I know that I'm borrowing a loan, but I don't know how much it's for. So they didn't know that, and they certainly don't know their interest rates. And they also, it would be helpful in the tool if they knew other aid that they had, the amounts and the types, because there's a part where it budgets out for them their costs and their aid, and it puts it together and shows them, what that looks like. So they can go through the tool without having any of this information, but they can get through the counseling, but it's not as helpful. The whole point is to see how your budgeting is coming together. I mean, that's a big part of the tool. So if they can't see that, it's just not as effective. Another confusing part, and it's a bit of a catch-22, is that when students are doing entrance counseling, they log into NSLDS, they click on the entrance counseling module, and the first thing that pops up is how much they owe, and that's $0 because nothing has been dispersed yet. So they're looking at it and they're saying, I know I borrowed money, but it's not showing up. So they can enter that. They can put their loans into the module, and it'll populate that. But again, they often don't know the details of that. So they have to come in with that information. The calculators can be problematic as well in entrance. They're exactly the same as they are in exit. They really lack directions, telling the borrower what the calculator is actually doing. That was one of our talking points in the observations that we went through. As they were fiddling with the calculator afterwards, we'd say, and what is that calculator doing? And then they would describe to us what they think it's doing. And especially in entrance, they were wrong a lot of times, or very confused. They just weren't really sure what was happening. So there just needs to be some more direction there. So the next few slides here are a series of recommendations. A couple here for practitioners. So schools, at this point, we feel like schools can help with some of these issues. For one, providing a basic introduction. So these are some of these things we hope that the department will fix on their tool, will put into their tool. But for now, since it's not in there, it could be helpful just to let borrowers know what they're going to see, why it's important, that kind of thing. There's also a YouTube video that the department has that's buried, like in the second page of the module. It's actually a very good video. It's about the repayment process and just kind of a good overview of the whole thing. It's about 2 or 3 minutes. It's an animated thing. And it's really good. The borrowers who watched it said that they wish they had seen it first before going through the whole tool. And we thought that's a good idea. They should embed that video at the beginning of the module. But it's not. It's this little tiny link at the bottom of the second page that says, watch our YouTube video, with a little link. And it doesn't even describe what it is or how long it is. And students, we've found, don't like to click outside of the module. They'll do things in it, but they don't want to go outside of it. They just want to stay on task. So even if they saw the link, they never clicked on it. So that's something that we think financial aid offices at this point could maybe provide first. Like, here's a good overview before you get started on the counseling tool. Students also wanted actual contact information for their servicer. I guess this was more relevant for the exit counseling, but the tool tells them the name of their servicer, but that's it. It doesn't give them phone number or email or anything. Students also need to know more about what the budgeting tool is trying to do. It's a good tool, and if they don't put in real, reasonable information, then they're not getting what they can out of it. So it asks them for costs for things like rent and utilities, which they probably know. But it also asks for costs, and this is maybe more relevant in the entrance than the exit, but it asks for costs of monthly groceries, insurance, medical expenses, entertainment, transportation, and other things. Things that a student coming in might be like, I have no idea how much my monthly insurance cost would be. So if they don't put in accurate information in there, it gets carried forward and creates this budget thing for the student that might not accurately reflect what's going on. So we imagine that maybe a financial aid office could provide like an average or a range or something that a student could at least know that this is a reasonable number that I could put in here, even if it's not exactly what their number might be. Most students that we saw failed to make the connection between a high loan burden and an income-driven repayment plan. So part of the problem is the way it's presented on the module is the plans, the IDR plans look complicated and inflexible and inferior to the standard, which is seen as cheaper and simpler and smarter. And even its name, standard repayment plan, and its status as the default plan creates a perception that it's the right one to choose. So also, the material is agnostic, and this is a point that the department will probably be unwilling to change on, but it just presents it all in a table and just gives it to you like that. And it doesn't tell them, because of your circumstances, you might look at this plan, this might be the best plan for you. So one student said, why won't they just tell me the answer? I mean, I just told it all my income and budget and all that. Isn't there just one that's best for me? They want advice, but they're not getting advice from the module, and they probably won't ever get advice from the module. But this is something that a financial aid office can provide because they're seen as the trusted source of information. The financial aid office can destabilize the normality of the standard repayment plan. They can demystify the income-driven repayment plans, and most importantly, provide firm advice for the student about what might be in their best interest. So we have a lot of design recommendations. This is a very short summary of some of them. We gave those recommendations to the Department of Education, and they've been very receptive. So we're hoping that some changes can be made. But these are recommendations that things that we think could be improved just by changing the way it's presented on the tool without changing anything else, like in legislation or anything. So just to give you an idea of what we were recommending to the department. First, a general introduction, like I just mentioned. We hope that they can do that, as well as embedding that YouTube video. Next, smart filtering. That's just using the information they already know, like from NSLDS, or they could even have a couple of questions at the top of the module to further enhance some filtering, just to be able to present the most relevant information to the borrower based on their circumstance. We also recommend shorter pages. So currently it's 5 tabs and they are very long. You're just scrolling for a long time to get to the bottom to hit continue. And the first page is the longest page. The second page is the second longest page. So you're kind of starting out on the wrong foot. As students are going through the first page, they're like, this is so long. They're all like this. This is going to take forever. So we could see having it in like a slide format, like would just fit on a page. That way students could better keep track of their progress, even if there's 30 pages, knowing that they're on page 11 of 30, they know how long it took to get to 11. It's easier to gauge your progress that way. And from the department's perspective, it's easier to sequence. If they want to change or add or remove something, they can do that a little bit easier because everything's kind of in short page format. We just think that shorter pages would be easier for the borrower, less intimidating. And on top of that, we would recommend reducing length through editing, just straight up removing some of the text, making things more concise, and also making things look shorter. They do this a little bit in their tool, and we think they should do it more, where they'll have a header, a headline, and a little plus sign where you can expand it and see the whole text. But the default when you get on the page is that it's collapsed. And so if they did that, the information is there and the borrower can look at it, but it doesn't look like this huge block of text until they open it up. So it just kind of fakes them out a little bit, makes it look like it's shorter than it really is. We recommend further simplifying the calculators, and we gave them a lot of specific examples just to help the borrowers comprehend better what's going on with them, providing some directions and making them a little bit easier to use. Because if they don't understand it, they get frustrated, they might skip it, then why even have the calculator in there? It's kind of pointless. But the calculators are great. We like the calculators. They just need to be a little bit improved. And then the sample budgets. We think that they could probably just provide some text on there to help students pick a reasonable number for some of those things that they may not know. And then embedding the income data. So they provide a link to a website that a student can go and get a better idea of what their salary might be based on the career they're interested in. But as I said, students don't click outside of the module. They just don't do that. We had one student who clicked on the income link. So if they could embed something, I think people would actually use it. So policy recommendations, these recommendations are ones that would require actual legislation, changes to the legislation, but we think that they're important. We recommend clarifying the counseling regulations to allow greater professional discretion. So some schools would like to provide more robust loan counseling, but they fear that their good intentions may be interpreted as improperly obstructing students' access to federal aid. So we need to somehow balance access with discretion to better inform students, so schools can come up with innovative ways to create counseling methods that work for their own students. We also recommend exploring funding or regulatory incentives for robust or supplemental or innovative counseling methods. And in line with this, we recommend greater resources for counseling in financial aid offices. Of course, we definitely want you all to get more money. With the budget strains and substantial compliance burden, there's just not enough resources for loan counseling, especially like an in-person or more intrusive loan counseling. So more resources could be more staff or contracting out, whatever makes sense. Another recommendation is to provide clarity and executive flexibility for HEA counseling requirements. So this would allow the Department of Education to determine the details of content, timing, and other particulars instead of having it written in legislation the way it is. That would allow the department to make counseling more responsive to future developments in higher education or financial aid or counseling research instead of having to wait for Congress to pass something. It would give them some discretion there. And we recommend more learning with less information. And the last two bullets really go together, because if we want more learning with less information, as in entrance, for example, not the entire recommended list, but maybe some subset of that, and then along with that, having intermediate or additional counseling somewhere between entrance and exit, where they would get that additional information. So it spreads it out more, makes it more manageable, has it presented to students at times that maybe are less stressful. They can understand it better, and it might be times there might be certain pieces of information that just make more sense to present somewhere in the middle for more like a just-in-time counseling. So here's a quote that we really like. The student said, there's so much information but not a lot of counseling. So it really just sums up kind of the issue that students have with the counseling module. So the last thing I'll go over very quickly is the promising practices. We visited schools who were doing something beyond just the minimum requirements of entrance and exit counseling and using the Department of Education's tool. We wanted to see some of the ways that they're addressing the issue of counseling their students, and we, as much as possible, wanted to try to assess the efficacy of those efforts. And in doing so, we hope to better understand the obstacles and opportunities facing these schools and how other schools might use those methods in their own institutions. So our final report will have some recommendations. So we went to these 8 schools. They're from 4 sectors from across the country. And we've completed all the site visits. We're just now doing the sort of analysis and coding, and we'll start writing very soon. That report will be out later in the spring. So I'll just go through some of the approaches that the schools used. The intent of the schools is really to integrate the counseling messages in some way so that borrowers would consider their student loans more holistically, incorporating things like what they plan to major in, leading to what kind of career they're interested in, which is the salary they're going to make, and also holistically in terms of their overall financial education, not just student loans, but other finances in their life. Some schools focused on robust in-person entrance counseling. A couple of schools we visited have a required 2-hour group session in person that borrowers must attend before receiving their disbursement. Other schools focused on a model that used peer-to-peer counseling, finding that students were more likely to listen to and talk openly with peers rather than a staff member. Other schools focused on financial literacy training, incorporating student loan information into an overall program of financial education. And some wanted to expand the counseling so that students would receive the information more than just the 2 bookend times. So one school had their borrowers attend a 2-hour in-person session every fall, and they also have their borrowers complete exit counseling in the spring if they're not enrolled in the summer session, even if they're enrolled for fall, just in case they don't come back for fall. And some schools focus on in-person exit counseling, strongly emphasizing their in-person one-on-one sessions. So the next steps, the first report. So the first report that ended up getting published is actually report number 2. The borrower observations from exit counseling. But the first one about legislative history and literature review will be published probably in the next week or 2. And then we have a third report on the borrower observations from entrance counseling that will be coming out probably in the next month or so. And then a fourth report on promising practices, which will be out in the spring, and a policy-focused report which will contain recommendations for policymakers, and it will pull from all the previous reports and kind of summarize them together. And that report will be published in the spring. And we've been in communication with the Department of Education and the U.S. Treasury Department, and they're both interested in our study and have been very receptive to hearing recommendations. So we'll continue to work with them. So thank you for your attention, and if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear.
Anybody have any questions or comments? So this has been presented to the Department of Ed?
It has,
Okay.
not exactly in this form, but we've had a few different conference calls with them.
Okay. Because I know the undersecretary was on our campus not that long ago, and we were talking about financial literacy and entrance and exit counseling, and I was expressing my concern that, because they kept reiterating that, well, you have the option to do counseling more often. I said, but we don't have any leverage. So we're not allowed to say, okay, we want you to do counseling. Because I really feel like some of the things that you said in there, I really feel like we're giving them all this information at the beginning and all of it at the end and nothing in the middle. And true financial literacy is figuring out what do they need to know at different periods of time. And it also just prepares them, in a better way. But we can't stop their disbursement. So we're being told to reduce student debt. We're being told to reduce our cohort default rate. But yet, and there's tools out there, there's ways that we can help mitigate that, but we can't hold the students accountable for ensuring that they do that. So that was some of the concerns I expressed. And it seems like this, confirms some of that.
Right. We completely agree.
Yeah.
We would like schools to have more leverage.
It's just a matter of being able to say, okay, and I don't see, it's not, I think there's a fear that we're keeping students from getting their money. I'm just like, if everything can be done online and they do their entrances pretty quickly, even though it can be cumbersome, it's not too much to ask if we're being held accountable for that cohort default rate and we're being held accountable for the student debt levels that are out there, then we should be able to hold the students accountable for making sure they understand the information about their student loans, right? That seems logical. So anyway, I brought that up with the undersecretary, and maybe this will. That's why I was wondering how many conversations had taken place. So
yeah, we've had a few, and they've been very, very receptive. We've mostly talked with the team that handles the tool. So they're about to start a new. I don't know how much they're revamping it, but they're looking at it to try to improve it.
So can we get a copy? Well, I'm just wondering, because I did make a connection with his chief of staff, his card, and he wants to know more about what we want to do for financial literacy. So if we have an opportunity, we could potentially get something in his hands. So if you can get me some information to get in his hands, to get connected with y'all, and then I'll talk to, we're going to be up in, Ann and I will be up in D.C. with NASFA, so maybe we can have a conversation with Justin and see if we can move that agenda along a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Carla, weren't there, you all did a couple of other reports earlier on student debt that did talk about financial literacy, in-school counseling recommendations?
Right, yeah, some of the other recommendations we've had from previous studies include the integrated counseling that I kind of briefly mentioned, but the fact that you can't just borrow loans in a bubble. It's related to what you're majoring in and what your career is going to be and what your salary will be from that, and it's all interconnected. So somehow integrating those counseling messages is important. And then just a greater emphasis on financial literacy in schools. And then another thing that occurred to me when I was thinking about the recommendations just now is that the card default rate is not a financial aid problem. It's a school problem. So everyone in the school should be concerned, because if a student doesn't graduate, then they are far more likely to default on their loans, no matter what they majored in or how much they borrowed. So that's not on the financial aid office solely. I mean, the school is involved in making sure that students are retained and that they graduate. So that's an issue too, is making sure the whole school gets involved in this issue to keep their core default rate down and get students out the door with a degree.
Pilar?
I know that we had a couple of financial aid literacies with the help of the community and local banks to give the information, but a lot of their emphasis was on, loan debt, not so much loan debt, but credit card debt, and it's a little bit different. It wasn't the message that I wanted them to get. And we talk to our students, but I don't think it's something that counselors, work specifically with. It is something we need to tell we tell them, try to just borrow what you need. Don't forget you have to pay this back. In fact, with the Be On Time, I tell them, you make a 2.9, you're going to pay it back. You finish in 4.5 years, you're going to pay it back. Kind of, stressing to them that and just keeping it down to a minimum. But unfortunately, I think I can't speak for all counselors, but I know that we don't concentrate on that. And we need to make sure that we get the messages, because I know you're busy awarding or doing other things, and you don't have that individual contact that a high school counselor, especially a senior counselor, works with the students. So some kind of a campaign or something to an awareness that we all, as you said, we all are part of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It has to start earlier.
So it seems to me what you guys have tried to do is understand the pedagogy behind online learning. And I would have to think that there's a lot of information and material out there on what it takes to help a student learn online. Have you used any of those resources? I mean, I think this is a great research project, actually watching the students go through the process. But I do have to believe there are materials out there on online learning that could also be integrated, that would also give you some oomph, right, with the Department of Education, saying, well, here's what we've discovered based on our own studies, and we have some precedents here as well that have backed up what we've learned, so that it's not just one small group saying, here's what we've done, but that you have some backup information of other. I'm sitting here thinking of, some of the professors at Rice and some of the online stuff that they do. Now, they're all face-to-face classes, but they have online elements to their classes, and they're very successful. So, and it's a pedagogy that is used, in some institutions, some it's all online, some it's all face-to-face, but I think there's got to be something out there to help back up this good work that you guys have done.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I didn't do the literature review, so I'll have to ask my colleague if there's if he found some information about that. But I think that would be. I think that at some point we would link, everything together and put that together with the policy recommendations. But maybe it's better to do that sooner, like in the entrance report that is coming out in a little bit. To back up the claims more, and especially when we're talking with the department. Yeah, but they have been really. Very receptive. We were surprised, so it's been good.
Anybody else have any, Carolyn?
A long time ago, I guess it's been over 10 years when we still had plenty of staff to help all students. If a student had borrowed $30,000 already, we made them come in and do a one-on-one loan counseling, but now we just don't have the staff to do that. But that's maybe something that could be incorporated is just sending out notifications once they hit certain dollar amount levels, just to give them an update.
Yeah, some of the schools we've talked to do things like every year they send students a summary of what they've borrowed, like cumulatively, so they can see what they're up to. At that point. And then we've had schools who do things like that, like when they're at a certain limit, they have them come in for additional counseling. So those are all good things. That's kind of the targeting aspect, which is really good. Targeting sort of at risk or students who you might be a little concerned about, like if they're borrowing a ton of money. So I think that's a good thing for schools to do.
I thought about this when you were talking about, when you cited the quote about a lot of information but no counseling. And you talked about how in-person exit counseling may be more effective than say, web-based or written exit counseling. Did you have much of a chance to look at that and find out whether one-on-one in-person exit counseling was more effective than, say, small group in-person exit counseling?
No, we didn't. So most of the schools that we talked to, it seems like do group, probably just because of resources. I think we had one school that does one-on-one. So, and that's in the best practices. So that's only 8 schools. But yeah, I don't know that unfortunately, I'm not sure that one-on-one is done enough to really know that answer. But it seems that the schools that are doing the group ones, they feel like it's been effective. So I think that they would say that that's better than online, and I'm not sure if they could compare it to one-on-one themselves. Yeah. That's a good question, though.
Okay. And also, I'm sure you haven't gotten to this point yet, but do you have any plans to look at delinquency and default rates based on people who did or didn't do various types of exit counseling?
We would love to do that. We actually would also like to do other types of experiment, like I guess exactly along those lines, different types of counseling and the outcomes from that. So we've talked about that. Hopefully that's a next phase, but it depends on funding.
Yeah. I found myself thinking about your comment about lacking the staff, the professional staff certainly, to do this. And we certainly fight that battle and have been using an awful lot of work studies and undergraduate staffers. So I was kind of wondering, I wonder what would happen if we could demonstrate true efficacy for, say, in-person counseling. I wonder how a proposal to create sort of a student loan version of the Texas Advising Corps might go, with those student advisors on campuses doing in-person exit counseling this intervening counseling that you're talking about, things like that, and always being available for one-on-one counseling. But the key part of the key would be to make sure they're very well versed and very well trained on financial literacy and on all the student loan options for managing debt. But I think we'd have to get to the point where we could say, look, we looked at thousands of students who went through various types of counseling, and this is what we found.
Right. Yeah. I know that there's one school we visited that uses the peer-to-peer model, and they've found, and they do the holistic financial education. They don't just focus on student loans, and they've found it to be very effective. And they're just using their own students, people who are majoring in like accounting or business or whatever, that would look good on their resume. They don't even pay these students, and so it's been a really good thing for that school, and that's worked well. But it's a model that other schools might be able to use.
I think a lot of it is that they don't understand. The Department of Ed came to do a parent session, a student session on loan default. I could only get 15 parents in this huge auditorium. They were all going, Ms. Janice, ¿qué es eso, loan default? They don't understand. The students don't understand. And I know that with one session, they're not going to really understand. So I think it needs to be, and what you said earlier, it needs to be, again, earlier in high school for students to know borrowing responsibly, and just what they need, and not extending themselves to borrow money to just get, to other things other than educational expenses, sometimes because they have to, because of necessity.
Right.
But I think getting that information, because a lot of the students and parents don't understand.
Yeah, that's true.
I've got a question and comment. I think that from my personal experience that the in-person counseling is much more effective, because you might touch on a topic that the student didn't think about at all, and it'll click their interest, and then they'll be more consumed in the process. But I've also just had conflicting information as to whether or not a school can mandate in-person counseling. So the schools that are doing that, is that part of their default prevention plan, or is it something that they're just mandating? And again, the question is, are we supposed to be doing that as an institution, because it ties into putting that brick or wall between them, the student, and their funds?
Right. Yeah, and that's been a big problem, I think, for schools trying to do more. So the schools that we talk to that have like the 2-hour in-person group, they did have a default management plan. I'm not 100% sure if it was part of that plan, but I know that the director of one of those schools just told me, we just do this because it's important. And then we've talked to the department and expressed concerns that schools have had about being able to do these things. And they basically said schools shouldn't feel worried. So the problem is it's unclear, right? So schools don't know that they can, or if they're going to get in trouble if they do. So
They do continue to say, you can do this, but they're still out in the legislation that says you can't hold up disbursement. So that was my, not argument, but discussion with the undersecretary. I said, if you're going to hold us accountable, then, and I think he was saying that a Dear Colleague letter was coming out telling schools you have the freedom to do all these counseling and financial literacy, but there still wasn't any clear guidance. And if you're like me, I want something that says, because I don't want to get dinged. I go through an audit every year, right? We all get audited. And if I go in and hold up a disbursement and that student happens to be in the pool of students that gets selected for that audit, then I'm going to get questioned as to why did you wait to disperse those funds when they were eligible, based on anything else. So I'm not willing to take that chance, but yet to me it flies in the face of us trying to manage and mitigate the risk associated with student debt and cohort default rates. So you can use it. One of the things we talked about is, when you're trying to identify those students that maybe are struggling, like the higher loan debt, we were looking at our SAP kids and make it part of the academic plan.
Yeah, that's what.
It's one way to get some of them in there. It's part of your academic plan. They got to go through, some kind of program, and it doesn't have to be face-to-face, or you can come up with whatever program you want, but if it's part of your academic plan, then you can do it. And those students are at risk, so that would be one way to do it. But I wish they would just That's what I was telling them, just let us hold the disbursement. It's not going to, there's that fear that you're going to keep students from getting their money, not if they do what they're supposed to. I mean, let's be real, right?
They mentioned that letter, that Dear Colleague letter to us several months ago.
Yeah.
I don't know when it's coming out, but that would be
I don't either. I
nice.
thought it was already coming out because this was back in January. Well, it was January. Wasn't that long ago. It seems like it was forever ago, but it was in January. So
yeah.
Well, there's a different meaning to a federal soon than anybody else's soon.
It's very true.
We could just take the risk and say, I'm sorry later.
Better to apologize than.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you have no leverage to try to help students understand, the obligation on student loans. And that's one thing the students find out is I agree, they're very busy when they start out doing entrance counseling. And then, if you're not going to really hit them again with anything about it until they do exit counseling, they're not thinking of it. And we've been trying to put more and more things out there in front of them, but it's difficult, and especially at a large institution. I mean, you just can't get to everybody.
Yeah.
I'd just like to thank TG for doing this study. I remember when the Department of Education, in response to criticisms about rising default rates, mandated entrance and exit counseling. To the best of my knowledge, nobody had ever done any research to see whether or not it actually helped or was correlated with preventing default. And studies like this, I think, can make it much more effective, both for the purposes of default prevention and also to make sure that just those debts are more manageable. We're not going to have people, eating ramen noodles and stuff, for the first couple, 3 years out of school. So, as much as I, by the way, love ramen noodles, so. This is good stuff, and I hope you guys will keep doing this.
Thanks.
I was just going to make a point just to make everyone aware. We're one of the schools participating in Senate Bill 680's default aversion pilot program that's really run by the coordinating board and TG. And I think it really provides a pretty good model for maybe addressing some of the issues that we have with respect to students not only going into possibly default because they don't understand how to repay their loan, but also some of the financial literacy issues. And we're one of 4 schools participating in the financial coaching, which if we have students that are at high risk, maybe they're withdrawing or they're requesting an unsubsidized loan after a parent denial or they have a below 2.0 and they're struggling, we can actually notify them and they can schedule a financial coaching session with a financial coach at TG. And that allows them to have a one-on-one interaction through Skype. They can develop a budget. If they found out they have a car they really shouldn't have bought, maybe how to work and really reprioritize their funds for going toward their education. And I think the benefit of that is we're not saying you have to show up at a certain time, because a lot of feedback we get from students is it's not convenient to come between 9 and 10 for counseling, whether it's on a student loan in the interim sense or for financial literacy. So I just think that's a model this may be worth exploring more, expanding. I know we have to go through the pilot phase first, but boy, it would be really nice to leverage the state's sources and have a more centralized way of helping students, especially when our resources are so limited at the institutional level, and really getting an economy of scale by having a more centralized approach. And I know we're only one of 4 schools participating in the pilot program with financial coaching, but I just want to make everyone aware of that, at least possible opportunity of expanding into the future.
Anybody else? Great discussion, y'all, and great report. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Can I?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry, Marcus.
Not necessarily on that, but somewhat related because it is defaults. Are y'all looking at implementing any changes because of the relationship between the clearinghouse reporting to NSLDS, doing enrollment verifications now, and technical defaults that could potentially come out of that? Not until it happens. We're seeing lots of paper enrollment verifications.
Yeah. We talked about this at the TASFA board meeting, and other schools are as well. And seeing a lot of the paper resurfacing and the issues and challenges. So we have not decided at our institution whether we're going to change anything yet. We are talking with the registrar now about the changes in the reporting and, what we might want to do.
I think the information we gathered is that obviously it's going to take a lot longer for the for NSLDS to be updated. And so trying to figure out how to be proactive is difficult at best, right? How do you take steps towards helping a student when you may not even know who that student is 60, 90 days down the road? So it's not going to help the situation, but also I think it's very difficult for schools to be proactive on working towards it because our hands are really tied at this point. So if anybody has any great ideas, share them.
Well, I know one thing. After that announcement was made and after the board meeting, we actually had talked with a representative from the clearinghouse, and I know their hands are sort of tied, but we've asked them to develop a way to upload those forms automatically to their website. So hopefully they'll have it that much more quickly and be able to get it to the NSLDS, so the lenders will have it beyond that 60 to 90-day time frame. Just an idea that we proposed to them.
Anything else? All right. Yeah, I got two more quick things on the agenda. Wanted to make you aware, because I think we asked about this last time. Connie gave me information on the Coordinating Board Strategic Planning Committee, right? Let's see. The Advisory Committee is charged with providing to the Coordinating Board advice and recommendations regarding the board's development of the next long-term strategic plan. We referenced it earlier because one of the things on there is about student debt. The Texas HESPC has been meeting on a monthly basis since March 3rd, 2014. Meeting agenda, materials, and minutes from each meeting are available on the Coordinating Board's website. So it's the thecb.state.tx.us/TXHESCP. Meetings are open for the public, broadcast live on the website. So if you want to check into those, the next meeting will be held, it already took place, February 17th. And then the next, looks like the next one's scheduled for potentially March 17th. So if that's something that you want to pay attention to, and it looks like they'll be soliciting some public input as well via online tools such as College Town Hall Texas. And it's anticipated that the Coordinating Board's quarterly meeting on July 23rd, they will present to the Coordinating Board for consideration and adoption final recommendations. So any input that you want. Has everybody seen the strategic plan or iterations of it? Because it's out there, right? It's out there on the website, right?
So did you say there were going to be town halls? Because
It
that's
says
been kind
here-
of in question. We weren't sure.
It says during the deliberations process, the Coordinating Board will solicit public input via stakeholder meetings and online tools such as College Town Hall Texas. That's what it says. Do we know anything more about that? Anybody?
Well, is that the website where you can solicit or?
Yeah.
So,
It's collegetownhalltx.com.
Yeah. And so through that, the public or anybody can submit input. Is that right?
Can this email that you sent me, can we forward that to the committee? Okay. No, I'm sorry. I thought I misunderstood. That's also right around the time I got sick. So we'll forward this out to the whole committee, and that way you can get the websites, and that way everybody can participate.
Is this something we could probably post to the Tassville listserv and
That's what I was
announcements?
Can we? I would
we?
think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll post it. I can do that. So I'll just post it, unless you want to post it, Ann.
But we have announcements also, which go to non-members, non-TASFA members.
Okay,
so that would be a broader.
I'll be sending out to the committee, and you guys can post it however you want.
Great.
That sounds great. All right. And then one final thing. Lisa was asked. I turned off my mic. Why did I do that? One final thing that Lisa is just soliciting our help with, and I've got some ideas on some of these topics, but we wanted to bring it up with the group really quickly. It's about FAFSA simplification, postcards. In the interest of offering a reasonably integrated federal and state aid application process, simplification advocates are open to adding a few more questions to Senator Alexander's 2-question postcard FAFSA. What should those questions be or address? They want descriptive comments, things like that. What would the state need? If we went to, because I think what I expressed to the undersecretary when he was on our campus is, and I think most people, the 2-question postcard, then that just means we're going to have to collect other information because it's just not, I understand simplification, but I think Senator Alexander, he brought out this big, huge paper FAFSA, and what everyone has been expressing from NASFA and everybody else is it's really online. It only takes 20 minutes to complete, and I even remember Jim Reed, our departed friend, just recently actually getting up at a microphone and talking about that. I think it was at last year's NASFA conference, about the fact that it really isn't, it's still complicated, but it's not as complicated as it was. But I guess what we're trying to get at here is, what other information would the state of Texas need if we did have to go to a postcard form? So we want to make sure that we're clear. Is that what we want the outcome of this? What fields would your state need to see? Any thoughts? I have thoughts about the 2-question postcard, but we don't need to share those here, right? Any?
Are the state programs aligned now to look at whatever FAFSA output is generated? So if the feds do make whatever change, the state programs are already capable of complying, or are rules going to have to be made kind of as a knee-jerk to accommodate whatever changes on the FAFSA? I think they are. I think we've tried to keep that language that way, but I'm not sure.
Well, I would say most of the programs are tied to an EFC, and the EFC that's generated is the federal EFC. Now, with the 2-question, that is really not an EFC. It's not an expected family contribution. It's a number to be used to allocate a limited number of resources. It's not a real definition of what a family can truly afford to pay. So at a school like ours, we use a profile because it's a much richer piece of information.
So your profile is going to get a whole lot longer.
No, we gather everything we need on the profile, but there are some other elements to the FAFSA, things like dependency. How do you determine whether a student, the homeless question, whether they're orphans or ward of the court, those kinds of things. Dependency is a bigger issue, I would think, at the public schools than it is at our schools. So if that's not part of the FAFSA, that would be difficult.
Well, I think that, you all do a profile, and many of us, we don't. And so what I see in this is many schools trying to go back to the old days of having an institutional application to gather everything they need to be able to determine a financial need, dependency status, and financial need for a student.
And I'm sorry.
Well, just to be very clear, we do have families who are eligible for Pell Grants, but once we look at all their data, they don't get anything else.
Right.
So obviously the government is okay with that, right?
Understand.
And I couldn't give you a percentage at our school, but it's a percentage, and it's bothersome. Anyway, go ahead, Lisa.
No, I'm just trying to figure out to get at what we need here for the coordinating board. Is there anything, I guess I'm thinking, based on what we've said, is that really giving a clear picture of need? So let's just think Texas Grant. Texas Grant is the big grant that we have, and the TEG and the TEOG are all based on need, right, along with the priority stuff, but it's all based on need. So are there any other questions that we would need to have answered besides, I know the answer is yes, but let's be specific, right? So if we had to go to that 2-question postcard, do we feel comfortable for state programs? Let's just exclude institutional, because we all know that we would probably have to collect more information at an institutional level, which has been a big part of the argument. But for the state need-based programs, do we feel comfortable that that 2-part question would give, because right now we feel comfortable that the FAFSA gives us the information we need with an EFC. We're using the EFC as a guide to determine who gets the Texas grant. Do we feel comfortable that that would still hold true with a 2-question postcard? for the state programs, not any of our institutional stuff.
Well, you probably agree with this. Maybe I won't put words in your mouth, but I don't feel comfortable with it determining it for federal programs. But if there is two questions and the Department of Education says this is what you use, and we typically align with the state programs, I think
that's what they're trying. Yeah, I think what they're trying to get at, though, because the thing that I'm concerned about is this is gonna open up a whole other set of students, and we already have limitations on the Texas. I'm just speaking for Texas Grant because all the programs are limited, right? And we don't have enough money to give out to all the students. We put in a special request to get enough funding to cover 100% of the students for Texas Grant and TEG and TOG. And then now, this could potentially open it up that more students would be eligible if we continue to use whatever EFC we get back from the quick FAFSA.
Texas still has the TAFSA, right? That we use for undocumented students. So, would you go to a place, I'm not suggesting this is a good answer, but would you go to the place of saying, well, we've got our federal form for our federal programs, and then we have our state form for our state programs, which is an issue because it's already difficult enough to get them to fill out the federal form.
And then we'll have an institutional form to collect institutional information, yeah. And then we're going to get criticized for having too many forms.
Well, I think that goes all against trying to make going to college accessible and make it simplified. Okay, I just want to say that.
Thank you, Delisa.
Yeah, I don't think the issue is necessarily the FAFSA, because the FAFSA is just a manifestation of the federal methodology. And so what you really have to do is go in and rewrite several dozen pages of law on the federal methodology. If one of the things he's asking for is your household income 2 years ago and your family size, both of those, it seems to me, could be obtained from a prior, or if the student from the prior year tax
data
that the family filed.
Right.
It seems to me the one issue, and so can a lot of other information on assets and things like that, if the government wants to use those. Seems to me the one thing that the tax data won't show us is number of family members in college. So if Ann and I both come from $100,000 homes, and I'm an only child going off to college, I'm going to get the whole EFC for my family. But she's got 6 brothers and sisters, 4 of whom are, including her, are in college. They've got to divide that EFC 4 ways. It's not fair to have Ann and I getting the same EFC or the same, whatever we're going to call it, the same indicator or whatever. Somehow we've got to figure out a few simple things that really drive that federal methodology that maybe should be preserved.
One thing, if we continue to verify against a tax transcript, one thing that is not being asked that we ask or look at are dividends and interests. So we know if there's a heavy dividend or interest reported, that there's a huge asset backing that up. That's never been part of the federal methodology. And so we know they're trying to tie it to a tax return. They're trying to tie it so that the family is really filling out one form, which is the tax return, and we're going to have a postcard to verify a few of those data elements. Then why not just give us the tax return information in a form to the schools, and you can then start asking the hard questions when it comes to either state aid, institutional aid, running your federal aid off of whatever data fields they think are important, but then you have the whole tax return with the data retrieval tool. We do 100% verification. It's not hard. So I don't know if that's a direction it should take, but that's beyond this group. It's beyond the state of Texas. That's more of a federal question.
And also, what about the tax situation where it's married filing separately or head of household? I mean, and you've got, two parents and they're filing their own taxes. How do you handle that?
And if a student doesn't have a prior tax year, do you just give them anything they want?
And we still collect W-2 forms, and we get a lot of untaxed income off of those W-2 forms that will make them ineligible for Pell. There's a lot of untaxed income that affects them. Mm-hmm. So
I concur with everything that was said. So my question, I'm bringing us back, right? Is there anything that we need to, because the first question that they've already answered, we do rely on the EFC calculation to determine our state aid. So that question has already been answered, a resounding yes. So is there anything else that if we did go, and this is just for state aid purposes, is there anything else based on what we know about what the postcard is going to do? It's going to go out and do the IRS data retrieval. Institutions may do their own thing on what they need to collect. Is there anything else besides perhaps maybe making sure that we got the number in college and dependency? So dependency status and maybe number in college might be
untaxed income?
And untaxed income, okay. So just because if we're relying on the EFC to give state aid out, we want to make sure that EFC is as accurate as possible, and it's not just about the taxes. That's whether it's prior year or prior year. So untaxed income, dependency status. What else did I say? Number in college. Is there anything else that we feel that could all still fit on a postcard?
Well,
Front
one
and
of
back.
those really big postcards with a great picture on the front of it.
When we're going to a half sheet instead of a postcard. Any other, is that reasonable for the discussion going on? I'm not saying it's reasonable overall. I'm saying, is that reasonable? We just want to, and I'll go in and write up some descriptive stuff, and I may solicit some feedback from you guys, just be looking for emails, say, hey, what do you think about this? Any changes, so that we have to do this by the end of next week, right? And
That
we'll
was
do it sooner
preferred.
than
This
that.
is for NASDAP. It's a survey.
Okay. I will do my best. Oh, no, not next week. Wait, what week are we in? No, we have one more week of February. I'm sorry. One more week of February. We'll get it done soon. Okay? On that?